hasn't found the end zone or got triple-digit yards in the game since week 5. He's now gone 4 consecutive games without reaching even 25 receiving yards.
This is just silly. The guy ranks second in target share in the NFL. They rank last in drop back rate over expected.
Did anything happen on Monday night, fellas? I'm just wondering. Did anything happen on Monday night?
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I am your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it's a great day to break down some of the biggest questions ahead of the first round of the fantasy playoffs. That's right, people. Let's get excited. Maybe you have a bye, which is great. That means you are fantastic at life, but otherwise, it is live or die, or now or never, I think is what I was looking for. Let's get those rosters right, and accordingly I'm joined by 2 professionals in this space. Some might even call them experts. We got Dwayne the Rock McFarland and also Chris the Sensei Stormtrooper Allen. Fellas, happy Wednesday. Dwayne, how's it going?
How are you going to me first with Chris? He's got the sunglasses on. He's got 2 hats. Like, look at the drip. Look at the drip here. Like,
I don't know, man. Did anything happen on Monday night, fellas? I'm just wondering. Did anything happen on Monday night? I was working hard late in the night. I didn't catch any of the action in prime time. I just wasn't sure if y'all happened to catch what happened.
You were in a meeting with NASA, Chris?
I was. I did have a couple of meetings with NASA, like a lot of stuff going on, so I wasn't able to catch what happened. But anything good? Nothing. Anything good?
Yeah. Cowboys got, I believe, Dwayne, 1 pick closer to Travis Hunter. I'll take that.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right. Look, I'll be honest. I thought the Bengals were going to beat the Cowboys by more than that, Chris. Yeah. So, I mean,
yeah,
look,
I would say that, yeah.
I'll take the loss, but I honestly thought that they could lose by like 21 because of the Cowboys. I wasn't as disappointed as Micah Parsons. I'm with Ian. I want the better draft pick.
I do love that Micah's showing, he was 100% right after the game. He's like, oh, I can walk out the field and be pissed, or I can, trade jerseys with Jamar Chase, and how are people going to feel about that? So damned if you do, damned if you don't over there. I just appreciate Micah Parsons, loving him some football, as we do as well here on the Fantasy Life Show. But fellas, do have some bad news we want to get to before we go ahead and get into the thickness of the show. And that is Steelers wide receiver George Pickens looking doubtful for week 15 against the Eagles, dealing with a grade 2 hamstring strain, and Mike Tomlin did say there's just an outside chance that he suits up. So, Dwayne, hardly ideal, particularly because the Steelers and Eagles are playing in that late afternoon Sunday time slot. So even if we somehow get a questionable game time decision sort of tag, really going to be tough to trust them.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I think we only have 7 early games on this slate, so you could have a lot of different options in the late window that you could be looking at. So, I mean, if we get the news early enough, obviously. So we'll see how all of that plays out. But the challenge is, if you're waiting on a Steeler, right, I can't tell you who to choose. Like, is it going to be Calvin Austin replacing him? No, his role really stayed the same. Oh, Mike Williams is going to be the starter. He's going to take George Pickens' role. No, he didn't. Scotty Miller also split that role with him. So, if we knew Mike Williams, Ian was going to come out and play that role the whole time with Russ, you could see, okay, maybe the guy comes down with 70 yards, gets a touchdown, you feel okay about it. But man, in a part-time role, there's really not a Steeler that you can turn to in this game. So that makes it that much trickier. It would probably need to be a replacement from a different team.
Mm-hmm. Chris Pickens has been the wide receiver 15 since Russ took over week 7 through 13. So we know that Russ, especially, playing very good football, can enable at least one fantasy relevant pass catcher. But to Dwayne's point, really looking muddled at wide receiver. Maybe Pat Freiermuth, is that doing anything for you?
That would be the only other pass catcher I would potentially look at. Him or Jaylen Warren, looking better in the running game, but also earning more targets than Najee Harris this past week. And going up against the Eagles secondary since week 9, 6-game sample, 160 passing yards per game allowed from Philadelphia's defensive front, because that's second fewest in the league, also 6th highest pressure rate as well. So with Russell Wilson, I know he's been playing well enough, but without having a guy like Pickens on the field, I would say we're looking at a few more shorter area targets. His average depth of target has been relatively low over the past couple of weeks, around 8 to 6 air yards per attempt. So if we're looking at a guy like Pat Freiermuth or Jaylen Warren, those are the 2 I would look to if you are focused on any of the Pittsburgh guys. But other than that, I'm with you and Dwayne. Not too many other options I would go to for week 15.
Looks like a chance for showers in that one as well. Two great defenses, and accordingly, just a game total of 42.5 points. Only Jaguars-Jets has a lower one in all of Week 15. So probably not the sort of matchup to get too excited about if you are into points. But hey, still, two of, I believe, the only 5 teams with at least double-digit wins. So should be good from a real-life perspective at a minimum. So that was the biggest news item from Tuesday, everybody. I did want to quickly run through some other notes, though, before we get into the good stuff today. Starting off with, of course, just crucial news here. The Saints added Ben DiNucci to the squad in case, they need some more quarterback depth. The guy who throws like Mahomes and does everything else, in just a significantly worse matter. At running back, Isaac Guerrero not practicing with that foot injury, although we did hear Shanahan say previously this was planned. So big news, I guess, going to come today, whether or not he manages to get a limited session in. Otherwise, Patrick Taylor seemingly the starting running back for at least a week. Also, the Raiders placed running back Zamir White on the IR with a quad issue. Sincere McCormick's path to that full-time featured role getting that much more clear. We'll see if Alexander Madison can return, though. Over at wide receiver, we do have Demarcus Robinson not practicing with that shoulder injury. We'll see if he is good to go for Thursday night. The Patriots waived wide receiver KJ Osborne. Browns waived Kadarius Toney. And the Panthers, though, did make a pair of moves. They added ex-Bengal wide receiver Trenton Irwin to their practice squad, and they did go ahead and sign ex-Bears running back, wide receiver, and kick returner Velus Jones to the starting roster. So how much help does Bryce Young need? I kid. Also at tight end, could maybe see the debut of Tyler Higbee here on Thursday. He has been practicing in full all week. And finally, it is true, Cowboys pass rusher DeMarvion Overshown, not only towards ACL, but also his PCL and MCL, putting his 2025 availability in doubt. So big time loss for the Cowboys defense. Get better soon, and damn those injury gods. So that was the news, guys. Now, before we get into throwing a little bit of shade, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football. You can get even closer to the action with my partners at DraftKings, because right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. That's right. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins after betting just $5. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have a shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Good vibes. We are throwing shade, presented by the fine folks at Knockaround. It might be snowing here in Columbus, Ohio, but we got our handy dandy Knockaround sunglasses on anyway, because guys, it's time for everyone's favorite segment of the week, Fraud Check, or maybe the performance was real, where we go through some of the week's biggest performers that maybe caught us by surprise and try to determine if it could be the sign of bigger and better things to come, or maybe if it was just, in Dwayne's words, a big old fugazi. So guys, let's start off with Jared Goff, coming off a QB6 finish last week, now going up against a Bills defense that, yes, is quite good, but as we saw last week against the Rams, can be had by an elite offense, which I do think the Lions qualify. So, Dwayne, you have Goff as your QB 13 on the week, my QB 10. Sounds like you're thinking he's a bit of a fraud. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but, what you reckon?
Well, look, he's a borderline QB1. That's what he is. We don't know which weeks, though, right? Is he going to jump into the top 6 versus which weeks is he going to finish more like the QB 20? Because the Lions offense is so diverse. Now, the offense for the Lions is really good. So that's going to always put Goff right there in the conversation of potentially being in the top 12. You're just trying to pick which week it is that they're going to actually throw the ball instead of running the ball. If you look at, the Lions, they have 35% of their drives in a touchdown. That's second in the NFL behind only Buffalo. So maybe we do get the shootout here, Ian. You've got a passing game on the other side that can challenge the Lions and push them to need to score the points. So I think based on that, it is one of those weeks where we could see him get higher. But the Bills also are very susceptible against the run. And we've seen it many weeks where the Lions just decide that, hey, you know what? We carry one of the highest team totals. They do every week, folks. And we're just going to run all of our touchdowns in. So it's just really tricky with Jared Goff. He no doubt is playing excellent football, but it's really akin to the old days with the 49ers quarterbacks, right? Where we just never knew for sure. It's a run balance team. Drop back rate over expectation is the third least in the NFL. So this is a team that does run the ball a lot, and we just don't know. Will the passes come through the air? Will the passes come through on the ground? Got the weapons. Goff's playing good, but it's just so unpredictable. But I do agree with you that this is the environment where we could see a massive shootout. So that does give Goff some severe upside.
He's right there in that tier, man. I would love to be able to have a super strong stance on this, but between him, Baker, Purdy, Jordan Love, and Bo Nix, man, I really can't see almost any order, and I'm not going to be too much of a hater towards it. So, Chris, I mean, let's face it, last week was just the second time that Goff finished better than QB 15 in the last 7 games. So maybe a situation where as good as that Lions, passing offense is, hasn't exactly always resulted in bunches of fantasy points.
That's true. And as you folks can see on the screen and the graphics next to us, he has popped up for these games here and there. And 9 games since their week 5 bye, just 5 of them over 250 passing yards, and 7 of those 9 with 2 or more passing touchdowns. So he does have that in him. It just requires the game script to really push the Lions into it, because we've seen the opposite side of it where it's just David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs really pulling most of that offense into those high-scoring games. But I will say this. Looking at how the Bills did against the Rams, funny thing, looking at the Rams' offensive game plan in Week 14, they were 26 in early down passing rate against Buffalo, which is a complete shift from the Rams' offense from what we saw earlier in the season. They've been 10th highest in early down passing rate throughout most of the season. So if the Rams have at least provided some level of blueprint for the Lions, where it's just they use their running backs on early downs, and then afterwards put their quarterback in the play action types of concepts so that he can perform well on 3rd and 4th downs. That's where I can see Jared Goff really start to shine. And honestly, that's Detroit's bread and butter. To Dwayne's point earlier, lower end in the league in terms of dropback over expectation rate. We can see a point where Dave Montgomery and Gibbs are used on the early downs, and then as the Rams did, just beating the Bills secondary over and over again on some of those outbreaking routes. And not just the Stafford and the Rams, but also we've seen this from Mahomes and Andy Reid. 3 touchdowns for Patrick Mahomes against the Bills. Flacco and Shane Steichen, another creative play caller. 3 touchdowns back in week 7 or 8 for the Colts. So I can see a similar scenario here where Jared Goff pops up for one of those better games, and especially with the Bills offense playing so well, it could be that type of interaction that can lead to the shootout that we want for a guy like Jared Goff.
Do believe in the modern NFL, good offense tends to be good defense, and that is seemingly what we have here. 54.5 point game total, guys. That is 5.5 points more than the next closest one. Get your popcorn ready for that late afternoon Sunday action. Let's talk a little running back, because we have James Conner coming off an RB7 finish, and he's been great this year. I think he still leads the NFL in total missed tackles force. He's a beast, got the contract extension. Everyone loves James Conner, but Dwayne, that was just the second time in 11 tries that Conner actually finished better than the PPR RB15. So again, not saying specifically on him, but do you think the fantasy success will keep up here in week 15 against the Patriots?
Yeah, it was really interesting because in week 14, he had his highest rushing attempt share of the season, going all the way back to week 8 when he had 77%. He had 78% of the team's rushing attempts in week 14. And what's interesting about that is over the 4 previous games, they had really been involving Trey Benson more, and it looked like they were moving to more of a 2-headed backfield. Over those 4 games, he had 38% of the carries, 50%, 55%. Sorry, those 3, 53, 38, 50, and 55. So not even getting to 60% in any of those games, and that was obviously impacting his fantasy performance to some extent. So when you look at his utilization score, I think you got to kind of look at it for the year, Ian, because we've kind of had these ups and downs throughout the year where he'll get a little bit more work, then he doesn't. I think a lot of it comes down to which drives he's on the field, and the way that they're deploying him each game. It's not so much that they're changing his role. So that makes it a little bit of a challenge to think that he's going to continue to be a running back 1. Now, I do like him this weekend. You're playing against the Patriots. You're a touchdown favorite. favorite. You're trying to get yourself into the playoffs. That could be the other thing. Sometimes when these teams are in crunch time, and they're trying to make the playoffs, it's like the NBA once they get to the playoffs, right? They shorten the bench. We're no longer giving all these scrubs all this playing time. So that could be what's occurring with James Conner. We know they really like him because they gave him that contract extension in the season despite his age. So we know the coaching staff is on board. So there is a chance that they do feed him. If they do, if he gets a workload similar to last weekend, I do think he can continue to be a running back one because the matchups we talked about it, the Patriots give a 3-point fantasy boost to the opposing running back position. If you look at the Panthers, that's the best in the NFL in week 16 at plus 7.9. I know Saquon Barkley didn't go bananas because we all finally started talking about it. And, sometimes we jinx things. So we'll be sure not to jinx it next week, Ian. Well, we probably won't. We probably will jinx it because they're playing the Panthers. And then in week 17, you've got a neutral matchup. So everything lines up here for James Conner, but it's hard to predict. Was last week a blip, or are the coaches actually going to ride him down this stretch to try and make the playoffs? And I just don't think that we can predict that.
My RB13, Dwayne's RB11. So Chris would like to think that, again, Connor's going to be in far more starting lineups than not. But maybe for, the lucky guillotine people of the world, now in these 4-team leagues basically at the end of the season, maybe that's a situation where, you could consider putting him on the bench.
Yeah, because in those leagues, and as we talked with Charch on Monday, you're really shooting for your ceiling outcome. And I get it. We haven't seen that type of outcome for James Conner often enough for us to want to trust him at this point in the season. But if for the regular fantasy folks, I can see a scenario where you would want to have him in your lineup. To Dwayne's point, he popped up for one of his highest carry shares for the entire season. But 5 of his last 6 games, double-digit target share for James Conner, just 11, 10, 15% over the last 3 weeks. And that is really, especially for this week against the Patriots, that's where you really want to try and have that type of running back in your lineup. A couple weeks ago, before going into their bye, they went up against Jonathan Taylor, had a receiving touchdown. Devon Achane a week before that, 2 receiving touchdowns for Devon Achane. The Patriots gave up 128 yards to Tony Pollard. So the matchup already kind of lends itself to going up against a running back, getting a number of carries, or at least working their way through the Patriots defense on the ground. But if we also have that type of out for James Conner, if he's going to continue to get used by Kyler Murray as a receiver as well, he should be at least at the borderline RB1, high-end RB2 range for week 15.
Let's move on to a wide receiver who probably sent, at least a decent number of you listening to this right now straight to the loser's bracket because Jordan Addison went absolutely bonkers in week 14 on his way to that wide receiver 3 finish. So, Dwayne, over these past 7 games, since we've even had TJ Hawkinson back in action, we've seen Justin Jefferson have 47 targets, Addison have 45. Addison has more air yards. Addison has more PPR points. Addison is better than Justin. No, I'm not going to go that far, but we are looking at a situation, Dwayne, where I don't know, would it be the wildest thing ever if Minnesota is basically this kind of upper middle class man's version of the Cincinnati Bengals, where between Jefferson and between Addison, probably should just start them both?
Yeah, I think that's where we are right now. Look, if you look at Addison over the last 4 games, he leads the team in utilization score at 9.4, leads the team in target share, 23.5 fantasy points per game. I mean, it's really hard to put a guy on the bench whenever he's been doing that for the last 4 games. Had one semi-dud in there, but it wasn't like a terrible dud. And you got 2 great performances, 1 good performance. So, look, when we look at a month of action, it's looking really good. Now, we talk about this all the time. What did the defensive coordinators look at? Typically, the last 4 weeks is the film they're studying the most. They're going to go look at other games as well, but they're going to see that Jordan Addison has been ripping everyone up. So now there's going to be more attention coming his way. And that's the next test for a young player. Can he continue to push through and actually beat the additional covers that they're going to send over to him? We've seen some players be able to continue to, push forward and take that step and just prove that, look, doesn't really matter what you do. And look, it's going to be hard for a defense because even though they see Jordan Addison, everybody knows who Justin Jefferson is, right? And he's on the other side of the field, and that really helps protect Jordan Addison. So we'll see how it ends up turning out. For me, I think you can't completely dismiss, though, the early season, right? We did have a first half of the season where Jordan Addison gave you a couple of boom games, but also gave you a lot of duds. So I really look at the utilization score for the season, Ian, and that upgrades him to a borderline wide receiver 2 if we take the whole season into account. I will say, though, and we talked about this on yesterday's show as well, Jordan Addison only in year 2. This could be him just truly clicking and turning into, the wide receiver that he's going to be, right, for his career. This could be that moment of where, hey, we're looking back at this and thinking, wow, that was when it happened. Jordan Addison's a guy that we consider, to be a high-end wide receiver too for the next multiple years, as long as obviously the Vikings can keep, Sam Darnold, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Sorry, JJ McCarthy. I'm not sure what's going to happen for you there.
I know, man. I was shout out Ben Solak, love his ESPN column. He was just floating out the idea that maybe the Vikings do start to consider, JJ McCarthy actually on the trade streets out here. Sam Darnold, again, tough to really bicker with anything he is pulling off at this point. So, Chris, Dwayne said it, borderline wide receiver 2. We're not going too crazy here in the ranks, but Dwayne's wide receiver 23, my wide receiver 24. Do some pushback. Freeman and Mr. Charge have him as wide receiver 32 and 34. So, whose side are you on, Chris? Who do you like more?
I'll go with you guys, since you guys are the closest to me right now. I don't want to cause any waves or cause any disruption or anything like that. But I would say putting him as a mid-range wide receiver 2 is fair. Looking at his usage over the past 4 weeks, Dwayne noted well above a 20% target share, air yards being used well down the field, all lines up for him to be in the wide receiver 2 conversation. It's just the volatility of his offense, and there are 2 parts to that. One, just in this past game, Justin Jefferson, 28% target share. TJ Hawkinson, 20% target share. Aaron Jones still mixing in for about 8 to 10% of the looks as well. So it's just, we have other pass catchers, other high-end target earners, especially in Justin Jefferson, still a part of that offense. Could week 15 be a scenario where things shift back to Justin Jefferson? We see TJ Hawkinson finally get into the box. I mean, those are always in play with this offense. But of course, it's also the play of Sam Darnold. And while he's played well, and I believe they have their divisional rematch against the Chicago Bears in week 15, and Darnold dropped 330 and 2 touchdowns again the last time that they played against him. So there shouldn't be much of an issue. It's just in how Sam Darnold plays. 10.4 air yards per attempt for Sam Darnold. It's one of the higher passing average depths of targets in the league. And that just injects a level of volatility that you can have some of those big plays, the shots downfield to Addison, shots downfield to Justin Jefferson, but you can't have some of those bonehead plays where earlier in the season he was having multiple turnovers. So it's just, that's one of the games that you have to play. But for Jordan Addison, given his usage, Dwayne already pointed it out, wide receiver 2, I think that's perfectly fair for where he's at right now.
Accordingly, Dwayne have Addison ranked ahead of guys like Brian Thomas, DJ Moore, Jameson Williams, Jacoby Myers, DK Metcalf, Jalen Waddle, and yes, even Malik Neighbors. So yeah, we are, pretty much all in on Jordan Addison this week. Not so much though on our last fraud check candidate, tight end Juwan Johnson, tight end 3 in week 14. I mean, he has a pair of top 10 finishes now in his last 3 games after previously finishing as tight end 19 or worse in every game since week 1. Sadly though, Dwayne, when we don't have Derek Carr under center, going to be tough to trust pretty much anyone in this offense. And honestly, I don't even think Alvin Kamara is too far removed from that sentiment.
Yeah, and if we're just kind of recapping, we haven't thrown much shade. I mean, Jared Goff, what was that? Semi-fraud. James Conner was not a fraud. Jordan Addison was not a fraud. Maybe not a wide receiver 1, but not a fraud. This one I do think is a fraud because of what you just talked about. Wow. We don't have Derek Carr. So that really does limit things. Look, we like Juwan Johnson. We wanted to get excited about him. We talked about him last week as being a tight end to add and play over Kyle Pitts. But if we're going to have Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener under center, that's going to be a real problem for the Saints, an offense that we weren't that crazy about to begin with. I guess you could still get most of the targets channeling through the guy, but it's not like he's posted a 30% target share, Ian. It's been an 18 and 19% target share over the last 2 games. So 18 to 20% of the targets from one of those quarterbacks isn't necessarily inspiring. If we somehow were to get a miraculous news that Carr's under center, well, then, yeah, I would say he's a borderline tight end 1. But otherwise, we're going to have him down lower in the tight end 2 ranks.
Chris, Dwayne, and I are lucky enough to be in a real-time sports final this week. Yay, us. Don't ask us how the other teams are doing, but we actually have 4 tight end options here on the squad. Juwan Johnson, Mike Gesicki, Kyle Pitts, and Isaiah Likely. Who should we start, Chris?
Not Juwan Johnson out of that group. I don't want to sound biased and say you have to start Mike Gesicki, but looking at how the Saints have operated without having Derek Carr under center, 24.5 points per game with Carr as their starting quarterback, just 12 with him out of the lineup. And that's just with a 3-game sample, 33 yards per drive with him in the lineup, 23.1 without him in the lineup. This is a one of the least efficient offenses in the league without Derek Carr. So with Juwan Johnson not really separating, not even from Foster Moreau, seeing him also mix in from some targets, it's to be tough to trust a guy like Juwan Johnson unless we really get any sort of news that he's going to really start to become one of the focal points of that offense.
Love how we've reached the point where Kyle Pitts just isn't even in the conversation. What a time to be alive. So Juwan Johnson, definitely a bit of a fraud, but even then, not exactly his fault there. But it's definitely not a fraud, guys, are the fine folks over at Knockaround. Again, we've been rocking their shades for the better part of the last 10 to 15 minutes. I might leave them on all day, man. I love these things. I certainly think I look cooler than usual. And also they're just comfy, man. High quality, so many different frame styles, all the different colors you want. Polarized lenses, UV 400 protection for your eyes. Again, super high quality for a low and affordable price. So if you guys want to head over to knockaround.com for your holiday shopping, I know personally, if anyone got me a pair of sunglasses, let alone one as nice as these, I would freaking love them around the holiday season. So you can check out the officially licensed NFL collection specifically. Whatever you get though, make sure you use code LIFE, that's LIFE, for free shipping on your order. Again, check it out over at knockaround.com. All right, fellas, time to go through some struggling big name wide receivers who, we probably had to draft pretty high back in August, but man, things have not been going great. And now, last week, potentially of the fantasy season, can't hold anything back now. Time to decide if they still got game or maybe they are just kind of lame. Chris, let's start things off with one Deebo Samuel who's been struggling, but taking it in stride, just putting his head down, working hard. Now he's actually popping off on social media. So do you think that the squeaky wheel gets the grease here, Chris, or is Deebo going to keep on dudding like he has been for the better part of the last 2 months?
Honestly, it could wind up being a little bit of both. He could wind up getting some of the targets and touches requisite for him to produce, but we could wind up with another fantasy dud on our rosters because even in the last 4 weeks, before week 14, around 20% of the targets still mixing in out of the backfield, and yet still like 4, 5, 6 PPR points from Deebo Samuel. One of the issues has been his inability to create after the catch. Statistically, for over the past couple of seasons, 3.2, 3.8 yards after contact per attempt when he has been out of the backfield, under 2.5 so far throughout the 2024 season. And I know with the ankle injury, him having to go to the hospital because he's had pneumonia, whatever the case has been for Deebo this year, we can at least explain away some of it. But if his yards per carry, his yards after contact, even his yards after the catch per reception have been down relative to where he's been at in past seasons, it's kind of tough to see how he can still create or still put out some of those explosive plays that he has in the past couple of seasons. So I'd still have him out there on my roster, like low end wide receiver 2, mid range wide receiver 2, somewhere in there. But the expectation for him, especially on a short week going against the Rams defense, might be tough to trust, or I would project more of a floor outing than some of the ceiling outings that we've seen from him in years past.
It's unfortunate, too, ahead of this Thursday night potential shootout here against the Rams. But Dwayne, end of the day, man, hasn't found the end zone or got triple-digit yards in the game since week 5. He's now gone 4 consecutive games without reaching even 25 receiving yards. He only had 3 such performances in the entirety of last season. So Juwan Jennings certainly looking like the wide receiver 1 in San Fran. Any hope for Deebo this week?
I think Chris is being generous saying that we would rank him as a wide receiver 2. We've got him in the wide receiver 3 range. You never want to say never on Deebo, because as soon as you do, he's going to explode. But it's hard to put him in your lineup if you've got other really good options. We've even seen these games since we've had the return of Juwan Jennings. In week 11, he did, to Chris's point, he had opportunities. He had his 27% target share, still only gave you 6.1 PPR points. Then in week 13, he had a 29% target share, only gave you 6 fantasy points. So even in these games where he's had his opportunities, it hasn't worked out for Deebo. I know he's jumped on social media and said, I'm just not getting the looks. Well, even in the games where he's gotten the looks, it hasn't gone well. So Deebo, for me, wide receiver 3, he obviously still carries that upside, and we know it could happen any game, but man, it's just not as often as it used to be. So he gets that downgrade. If we look at his utilization score since Juwan Jennings took over as starter in week 10, remember there were 2 weeks before that after the Ayuk injury where Juwan Jennings himself did not play. But if we look at all these games with Juwan Jennings back, the utilization score for Deebo Samuel is a 4.5. Guys, the scale is 0 to 10. 4.5 is not ideal. That is a wide receiver 4 That's a wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 5 in fantasy football based on data from the last 4 seasons. So you're just hoping to get lucky with Deebo, to be honest. And it could happen, but you are just hoping to get lucky if you're starting Deebo.
And that's what I'm saying, man. Like, Dwayne, I think with the season on the line, you can make an argument that guys like Elijah Moore and Ray McLeod have better, just should be starting them. All right. They've been better for months. We can say
I'm not starting Ray over him, but you're correct. I guess it would come down to my matchup. If I was a heavy favorite, I'm like, I might take my 10 points from Ray. But if I'm an underdog, I'm just praying for the Deebo 30-point outburst and the squeaky wheel getting the grease. But yeah, it's totally a prayer at this point for Deebo.
Please, Deebo, for the love of God, switch back to number 19. Man, enough is enough at this point. All right. So let's talk about another wide receiver who's been going off in the media just a bit recently, and that is Eagles wide receiver 1, A.J. Brown. So just going to start off, no, we aren't benching A.J. Brown. I have my wide receiver 11. Dwayne has wide receiver 12. But, it's a situation where it's pretty rare to see him outside the top 5. So maybe more of a, ultra blessed lineup sit candidate here. But either way, however you want to kind of fit it, Chris, has not been pretty for someone who we still know is very much one of the best real life wide receivers in the league.
Sure, and in the same vein with Deebo Samuel, we have seen A.J. Brown get some of the targets. He's had over 20% of the targets in 7 of his last 9 games since coming back from injury. So he has essentially been the team's wide receiver 1. It's just that he happens to be on an offense that doesn't really involve or look to the passing game as a way for them to create their offensive production. The Eagles right now, they're 31st in early down passing rate, and Hurts dropping back in the second half after blowing out teams in the first half, just 11.5 dropbacks per game. That's the league's second worst so far this season. So if we are now looking at a situation where A.J. Brown might be getting some of the targets in the early parts of the games, but now it's Devonta Smith. Dallas Goedert now hasn't been out, but Grant Calcaterra getting into the end zone just this past week, and of course the production of Saquon Barkley really being what's propelling the Eagles into these game-winning type of situations. It can be hard to trust, but I'm still looking at A.J. Brown's usage as a guy that we should look to as one of our, let's say, low-end wide receiver 1s. But of course, with the way that the Eagles operate right now, it can be tough to trust, especially going up against the Steelers defense in week 15, which have been limiting factors against wide receivers so far this year.
Tough matchup for sure. And yeah, we're not getting as many raw targets, but Dwayne, I do think Chris's initial point was probably the most important one. Target share is still very much there. Just a matter of if the Eagles are really ever going to have to keep their foot on the gas in the passing game.
Yeah, the question on the show sheet says, does A.J. Brown still got game, or is he just kind of lame? He still has game. It all just comes back to the things Chris talked about. I think it's kind of hilarious because Kellen Moore coming out talking to the media yesterday says, I'm going to focus more on trying to find different ways to increase the likelihood of the ball going to him being A.J. Brown. Ultimately, the quarterback has to play based off the reaction of the defense and trust that there's progressions within a play. For us, we're always going to evaluate how we get it to him sooner and create those opportunities. This is just silly. The guy ranks 2nd in target share in the NFL. 33%. This is not an issue with progressions. This is not an issue with when they drop back the pass, getting them the ball. It's all about what Chris said. They rank last in drop back rate over expected. You guys can see that over at FantasyLife in the utilization suite of tools, -9% versus the rest of the league whenever we can compare them on a play-to-play basis, looking at score and all the other situations that dictate how often teams pass the ball. They're passing the ball, or they're dropping back to pass a league low 30.8% of the time, and then almost 10% of the time, Jalen Hurts turns those into scrambles. So those are not real pass. Those are a pass play that turn into a run. So it's just a problem. It all comes down to the volume. This is a pass ratio thing, nothing to do with designing plays to get A.J. Brown. What are we going to do? Give the guy a 60% target share and just let teams double cover him and pick off everything that comes his way? This is just silliness, seeing some of this stuff coming out, from the coaches. If the only way to feed A.J. Brown more would be to actually throw the ball more. And in my opinion, the Eagles do need to at some point have a tune-up game in the passing game, because at some point in the playoffs, you're going to run into a game where that run game is not working. You're going to need to go to the pass game. And can that be a reality for you? And does that open up a potential for you to, make an early exit from the playoffs if you're not ready? They haven't needed it much because it's a great defense and they're running the ball great. So I'm not talking bad about the Eagles here. They're really good. They haven't been forced to need to throw the ball because they're winning running. But it is nice to know that if you need that fastball in the passing game, you still got it. So I think we probably see a little bit of a tune-up game here, and that'll be the way they handle A.J. Brown. They get the squeaky wheel, put some grease on it, but also know that it's something that can get them ready for the playoffs as well.
How dare the Eagles just successfully run the ball time and time again and win all these games? Can they just throw the ball and ignore all those real life aspirations here for a minute? I kid. But yeah, guys, again,
don't look now, Ian. All the best offenses are running the ball. And this has been a trend coming on for 3 or 4 years. All the best teams have a drop back rate under expectation right now. Now you have a few that are above it, but the elite offenses in the NFL, like they are staying much more to the run side of things. And guess what? These teams all have multiple passing game weapons, but they also have a good ground game. And that is something that just stresses defenses out, man. You can't take all that stuff away. So I think we're just seeing a trend. Also, obviously, the league's defenses playing more too high, all that kind of stuff we've been hearing about for years. This is the counterpunch from offenses. They're like, fine, you're going to give us the run game. Well, we've got a run game that can actually make it worth taking that, and we're going to take what you're giving us. And like you're saying, when you can come out and average 5-6 yards per carry on first down, well, now 2nd and 4 is not bad. So I'll take you any offense that could do that would take it every single time, and that's what the Eagles are doing.
Yeah, the whole hey, we need to pass the ball more is 2024. That's with the assumption you have more of a league average rushing attack when you're the freaking Eagles out here. Yeah, it does make sense to run the football. So A.J. Brown still very good. Only Nico Collins and Puka Nacua have more yards per route run, but yeah, haven't needed to overly increase those routes. And why would they? Eagles remain awesome. Let's talk about one more wide receiver that is, taking a ride on the struggle bus recently, guys. Packers wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to call him. Jayden Reed, Chris, someone who unfortunately has 3 or fewer targets in 4 of his last 6 games. So honestly, similar to Deebo Samuel, he is actually the number 1 wide receiver in rushing yards ahead of Deebo Samuel. But as we just talked about, man, tough to be too excited about really any player when we have to worry about him touching the ball more than just a few times a game.
And that's the tough part to trust for a guy like Jayden Reed, where going into this season, we expected him to have such a large role after showing out in his rookie campaign. But now seeing since week 4, 3 games over a 20% target share. And now that's on a team with for the Green Bay Packers that is dead last in early down passing rate. And the other part that goes against him, which I thought was going to be something of a shift, or maybe they would be able to work out. But Jordan Love, similar to the Sam Darnold conversation we were having earlier, likes to push the ball downfield. And of course, with Sam Darnold, we like Jordan Addison, we like Justin Jefferson because they are running those routes downfield. That's not where Jordan Addison plays. That's where Christian Watson plays. That's where Romeo Doubs has been playing. Even Dontavian Wicks, if he can catch the ball, has also been operating downfield. So with Reed having to compete with guys like Tucker Kraft or whomever out of the backfield is also looking for those short area targets, and really he now operates in a passing game where he's just kind of not really fitting with how Jordan Love likes to play football. So that's my general concern with Jayden Reed. Yes, he can take a backfield touch and create an explosive, but without some of the targets really to give him a floor, he kind of falls into that wide receiver 3 category for me, especially at the playoffs.
Dwayne, I'm looking at our consensus expert ranks right now, and there might be the most volatility between us 4 and Jayden Reed than any other player. Charge has him wide receiver 18, Friedman wide receiver 28, you're wide receiver 38, and I'm an even bigger dickhead and have him down there at wide receiver 45. So again, I kind of understand them all. I think Charge is maybe a little bit too excited, but you know what? That's how Charge lives life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But looking at Reed over guys like Tank Dell and Amari Cooper, man, it's close because we have seen the 2 touchdown spike week recently, but at the same time, maybe Romeo Doubs is back. It really is a tough call to win.
I love Charge, but there's no way you can rank Jayden Reed wide receiver 18. Even if I'm just throwing a dart at a dartboard, you can't rank Jayden Reed wide receiver 18. He's done nothing. He had a few big games early in the year, and those were based off of big plays and touchdowns. So if he comes through with those, yes, you get a wide receiver 1 potential finish, more likely a wide receiver 2 finish. But the problem is you have all of these games in between where he gives you absolute nothing. And we've seen the Packers offense long enough to kind of know what it is at this point. And it's been a relatively healthy offense. They've had some guys kind of come and go. But even in these games where they've been missing some of their other playmakers, they're not feeding Jaden Reed the ball more. It's been Christian Watson getting more work in those scenarios. So look at his utilization score, Ian. It's a 5.3 on the season. It speaks volumes. Only 10% of his comps have had a wide receiver 3 or better finish. That means 90% of them have been wide receiver 4s or wide receiver 5s. I really don't think there's anything to argue about here. He's a boom bust wide receiver 4. If he gets the boom, great. You'll look good for ranking him in your wide receiver 2 range. But I don't think there's any way to predict when that game is coming. And more games have been wide receiver 4 or 5 territory than wide receiver 2.
And it's one of those things, too, where I think you're spot on, Dwayne. Even the spike weeks, it's like you look back in hindsight and it's tough to be like, oh, yeah, we should have seen that one coming, because they're not coming on any level of volume that we can predict. When he had 2 touchdowns, it came on 3 catches for 24 yards, 6 targets out there. OK, so really is tough. Don't think, knock on wood, he's going to goose egg again necessarily. But yeah, certainly not someone who needs to be in fantasy lineups, unfortunately. So, guys, we just got done talking about some wide receivers. Now we're going to talk about some workhorse running backs right after a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwayne and Chris, we all know there's nothing quite like being at a game in person, whether it's a college football environment or going to maybe a basketball game. Hockey games in particular, I think, are just an absolute great time out there. And accordingly, guys, if you want to go to a sporting event, a concert, or maybe even a show, Game Time should be your go-to for finding amazing tickets. And honestly, guys, I was scrolling through the Game Time app the other day and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks, and it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and they make it so easy that it's truly a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can check it out for yourself by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, you can create an account and redeem code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. Freaking love me some Game Time. Freaking love me running backs who are getting all sorts of touches, guys. So want to try to focus on more of the, mid-tier RB2 types. Maybe we have some more questions about getting into that starting lineup. But again, their volume has very much been moving in the right direction. So yes, for the love of God, the Chuba Hubbards, the Chase Browns, Saquon Barkley's, Derrick Henrys, we all know we're starting them. If you didn't know that, well, you do now. Accordingly, we're going to get into some of the, more toss-up types of guys, starting off with the running back who is making mincemeat out of the Chris's Bengals defense there on Monday night. Dwayne, Rico Dowdle, a situation where, yeah, I do think his recent success has had a lot to do with facing the Giants and facing the Bengals. But you know what? When we got the Panthers up next, man, tough to say that this train is really going to slow down.
And whose idea was it to call a cookie mincemeat cookie? That sounds terrible. Say it's an apple spice cookie. I would actually want to eat an apple spice cookie, which is what a mincemeat cookie is. So I don't understand this. Maybe it was like adults back in the day were like, we need something just for us that the kids don't know is good. So we're going to call them mincemeat cookies. And that way all the kids are like, mincemeat? I'm not eating that crap. I'm not touching that. I think that's what the adults were doing, drinking some eggnog around the fire, hanging out. Didn't want the kids eating all the treats. I don't know. That's what we'll go with. But yes, Rico Dowdle is a must start this weekend, obviously against the Panthers. But to your point, even bigger picture, Ian, I mean, over these last 3 games, the Cowboys have clearly turned to him. 68%, 69%, 72% of the rushing attempts for the team. You look at his utilization score over that time, it is an 8.1. Assuming he keeps this role, which I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. Zeke has looked terrible. Deuce Vaughn's not active. Dalvin Cook has dusty. Hunter Lipke just comes in to basically pass block whenever it's like 3rd and forever. So Rico looks locked into this role. So if you look at his utilization score, Ian, you look at his comps, 67% of them have been running back 1s, low-end running back 1s, but then the rest of them have been high-end running back 2s. So I think you've got a borderline running back 1 the rest of the way. And this week, man, against the Panthers, who we talked about earlier, give up the biggest fantasy boost per our DVP tool over at FantasyLife.com. 2 running backs, it is a great, great spot for Rico Dowdle. So really going to be hard to have him on your bench. Some of you guys are going to send us a screenshot of a team where you got Chase Brown and Joe Mixon. Fine. You're not playing Rico Dowdle. but you're going to have to get your league mates to add an extra flex position next year so that you can get a guy like Rico Dowdle on the field, because he should be in most starting lineups.
Do love that move, by the way. Great take on mincemeat and everything with that, Dwayne, but just adding the extra flex as well. Good shouts all around. Accordingly, we do have Rico Dowdle, both Dwayne and I, as our RB15. Chris, that means he is ranked ahead of guys like Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones, Breece Hall, Tony Pollard, Steelers running backs, amongst others, which, again, saying it out loud still sounds a little bit wonky, but at some point, man, we got to trust that data.
No, and I would say that the talent in his situation, at least for Week 14, led itself to him being considered as one of those high-end RB2s. And that's where, from a running back standpoint, for fantasy, we do need to at least put that into our calculus. Because looking at the Cowboys' offense, yes, I know they went down to the wire against the Bengals, but without Dak Prescott under center, they've been towards the back end of the league. And essentially, most metrics that we care about, at least from a production standpoint, 28th in yards per drive without Dak Prescott, 26th in red zone plays, which would be useful for a guy like Rico Dowdle, and also 29th in offensive points per game. So it hasn't been the greatest situation for Dowdle over the past 3-4 weeks or so. But looking at their matchup for Week 15, Carolina, definitely want to have him in your lineup. But the next two, Tampa Bay, Philly, those might be where having the workload is great, but that offensive environment and the lack of touches he might get in the red zone might lead it to more of a floor performance than what we would want for a guy like Rico.
Certainly volume can win out, but yes, going to be tougher here in weeks 16 and 17. So hand up when Mike McCarthy went out to the media and was saying, oh yeah, Rico's our featured running back now. I kind of laughed at it because he had already been the starting running back anyway, but they really have given him that extra step up in usage recently, and he has more than made the most out of it. So good stuff by Rico and good stuff by Giants rookie RB Tyrone Tracy. Obviously was always a popular late round sleeper. And honestly, ever since about week 4 when Devin Singletary initially got injured, he has taken this starting job and never looked back. So Dwayne, coming off a season high 26 combined carries and targets. Yes, it would be a lot cooler if Drew Lock and company offered a bit more scoring upside, but Tyrone Tracy, man, even in a tough matchup against the Ravens, someone that has enough volume, particularly in the passing game, where doesn't exactly need to be sat by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, but I don't he's a must start like Rico Dowdle. Like, I think Rico Dowdle is a must start back this weekend because you've got the recent trend in utilization and you've got the matchup. For Tyrone Tracy, we have the utilization trend, not quite as strong as Rico Dowdle's though. Also, by the way, I mean, he's had the game where when he fumbled, he got pulled out early, only took 45% of the rushing attempts. Then the next week, they kind of held that against him a little bit longer. Last week, though, got 70% of the rushing attempts. And to your point, 70% of the route participation. But we also have games in the last 4 weeks where we've actually seen Devin Singletary take the passing down work. So I still think there's a little bit of fragility with Tracy's role. I look at him as the running back one, the clear-cut running back one for the Giants, but still a little bit more risky than Rico Dowdle at this point. And then you get the matchup against the Ravens, Ian. I mean, it's just tough. The Ravens don't give up a lot to running backs as far as fantasy points go. And then if you just look at this team total, it's the worst on the slate. So, I mean, we're talking about a game where we might not even see the Giants score a touchdown. So that's really problematic. So I have Tyrone Tracy really more in that running back 3 mix. To your point, there's going to be a lot of situations where you guys are going to get to put him into your lineup, but is not a must start in some of these smaller leagues.
15-point home dogs. I cannot remember the last time I even saw a line like that in the NFL. So, hey, good reminder, though, when you do get to face Drew Lock and these Giants, it does set up nicely for, the DST. So kudos to anyone that has the Ravens. And if you guys are lucky enough to have a bye and want to get ahead, they're not the best real-life unit, but the Colts are still, somewhat in the playoff race, so they're playing hard. And they get Will Levis and the Titans in Week 16, and then, yes, Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito and the Giants in Week 17. So just would keep an eye out on that if you are, again, trying to get into those DST streets. So not feeling amazing about Tracy, my RB21, Dwayne's RB28. I do think Dwayne hit the nail on the head. We feel better about Rico Dowdle. But, Chris, we feel way better than both of these running backs about Zach Charbonnet if Kenneth Walker is going to remain sidelined because, man, that calf injury, I don't know, man. Didn't like exactly how Mike McDonald was talking about it. Sounds like it could be a multi-week absence. So, Chris, let's assume Walker is out of the picture. Zach Charbonnet, top 10, top 5, top 3? How high can you go?
Top one. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But at least considering him as an RB1 for week 15 should be the way that folks go. And we talked about this a bit on Monday. Seeing the workload that Charbonnet walked into without Kenneth Walker was really encouraging. I mean, over 70% of the carries that Kenneth Walker had really only gotten to that point in 2 games so far this season as a starter. Now, realizing because he had a guy like Zach Charbonnet sitting behind him, that might have been some of the impetus for the Seahawks to continue to work him in, but also getting over a 20% target share as well. And going up against the Packers, this might sound like or look like one of the more better real football games than fantasy games. But looking at our DVP tool, Green Bay first in target boost for running back production. So if we can see another scenario where DK Metcalf comes into the game and with his ailments, he's not being used as much, JSN is really their best option in the passing game. And if Charbonnet continues to take some of those looks away from guys like Noah Fant and any of the other ancillary options for Geno Smith, I can see another scenario where Zach Charbonnet, top 12, I can dig it for week 15.
My RB10 right now, ahead of guys like Dave Montgomery, Chuba Hubbard, James Cook, Rico Pollard, amongst others. Again, really tough to complain about a guy with pretty much a 20-touch floor. I think we can almost say at this point, should be on the field 80% plus snaps there on Sunday night. So, Dwayne, let's close things out with a bit of a more complicated backfield because we have Rachaad White sitting here making big things happen. I mean, he's only finished outside the top 24 PPR RBs once since returning from injury in week 7. That said, as great as that boom was last week, certainly did have a lot to do with Bucky Irving only playing a handful of snaps before leaving with that back injury. So talk through your process with Rachaad White, Dwayne, whether or not we're going to see Bucky as well.
Well, we know he has a 3-down skill set, which is a big positive. He's been playing his best football since basically Bucky Irving has lit a fire under this guy and threatened to take away that starting role. So even though Rachaad White's role has reduced, he's playing his best football. So those are all positive things for him. The matchup this weekend's a little bit tough against the Chargers. Chargers like to run the ball and they like to take away the run. It's funny how coaches do those things. It's like if you're good at running the ball, usually your team's also good at stopping the run. Maybe that's what you practice against all day and you got to be ready for that sort of thing. I don't know. But yeah, whenever we look at Rachaad White, if we don't have Bucky Irving, Ian, I do think he's a borderline running back 1 despite the matchup because we know what he can also do in the passing game. And really, we've seen a lot of checkdowns underneath by the Bucs since the loss of Chris Godwin, whether that's to Sterling Shepard, whether that's been to the running backs. There for a period, it was more to Cade Otton. But I think there's a lot of opportunity if we get this thing down to 2 backs that Rachaad White sees more work in the passing game, enough to offset the tougher matchup on the ground from the Chargers. And then the final thing here would be just thinking about the backup situation. Obviously, if we have Bucky Irving active, that moves Rachaad White down to borderline running back 2 territory, maybe high-end running back 3 because we don't have 6 teams on bye.
That is about where we have him ranked right now. My RB24, Dwayne's RB26. So, Chris, if we don't have Bucky Irving, we're liking Rachaad White quite a bit more, and maybe we're a little Sean Tucker.
A little bit of Sean Tucker. I would say that and to Dwayne's point, Rachaad White has been more efficient as a rusher so far just this past week. 52.4% rushing success rate is one of his higher marks for the season, actually in the past couple of seasons. So if we can remove Irving from the equation of the Bucs backfield, having him in that RB2 role, even going up against the Chargers, 27th in running back points allowed in our DVP tool. Tough out, but I'd still look at White as a mid-range RB2 for week 15.
Good stuff there, guys. And good stuff to you listening. We appreciate you tuning in as always. So myself, Dwayne, and the great Matthew Friedman will be back on Thursday, breaking down our rankings, risers, followers, and of course, the ever-coveted sicko starts. So for Chris, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.